There we go. Keep that. So just watch. If it's not red, get excited. Yeah.
I know that show. Because, I saw the translator machine that I'm with. That machine was on that show.
In the show?
60.
Well, there you go. The CES, the Consumer Electronics. Like I say, I never even knew anything about it. My daughter, she's working as, like I say, as a model. So now I know all about it. Other than that, I have no interest in it because I'll never buy any of that stuff anyway. But people are really excited. Well, what I'm going to talk about today, and hopefully you'll be excited, is the. We have one member, hopefully he'll come. You're representing him, he's there. We're going to talk about the labor market, and I talked a bit about it the last time. And the thing is, what happened, I looked back and I looked at the data, and an interesting thing, the two previous years when I did this lecture, I only had the 2010 data. Then I got the 2015 data, which came out in the last year, late last year. So it's fairly new. And so I started looking at that data. And before my last lecture, and I started realizing something wasn't right. Something wasn't right with it. So I started looking at it again, preparing for this lecture, and I started going over it, and I realized there were a lot of interesting problems. And as I say interesting problems, because these are the kinds of issues I'm going to point out some of the kinds of issues that run when you run into data. As analysts, that you will in your career experience problems with data and how you deal with it. I'll show you how I dealt with the problems, and it'll give you a good picture and a much deeper picture than what I talked about the last time. I asked you to write out an essay. One of the things I want you to do is to start thinking about yourself as analysts and start being able to write down analysis. Because before you know it, if you have skills like that, somebody is going to want to pay you to do that. So if you like doing that kind of work, or you enjoy the idea of looking at numbers and writing about it, and actually have people giving you lots of money to do it, and why not? It's fun if you like it. I certainly enjoy it. But, so I'm going to talk about the data problems that I've had. First, so what I did when I did that, I've gone back and I've redone this analysis. So this is all new that I've done for this lecture. Mainly because I'm looking at these problems, and then I've redone this. And one of the things I've done is I've created 4 categories. I've reduced it to 4 categories: labor force entry, ages 15 to 21; core labor force, this is highest labor force participation, 22 to 61. And I'm doing it at the national level, so we're going to treat everything the same. Exit transition, that's when people are beginning to exit the labor force, and before most people are out. Many people are still in the labor force to this age, and then labor force exit ages 70 and over. And what we're going to do is we're going to be looking and seeing how the labor force has changed between 2010 and 2015, and we're going to see a lot of changes. Now you'll want to pay very close attention, because this is going to be on your final. You're going to get this database that I spent a lot of effort to put together, and so you'll get a chance to look at it and think about it as well for the final. I promise you that you'll have a problem where you'll have to take this data and do something with it. Very interesting stuff. So if you're interested in the Japanese economy, you'll learn a lot about working with this. I've certainly learned a lot more just in the last day, last 24 hours working with this data than I did before about the labor market. And I thought I had a pretty good handle. Well, now I have I think, a different and better handle on the labor market. and you will too. The first thing I'm going to show you is what I found. And you'll see the first thing is, let's focus on the national labor. This is the total, the labor force. Some of these numbers I gave to you last week, but now I'm putting them in a table where we can see these numbers. You see the total 2010, 2015, total labor force population, that's ages 15 and over. That's what that means. 110 million, 109 million, so a loss of about 500,000 in the total labor force. But we can see the labor force itself, the number shows it fell by 2.1 million. So 2.1 million decline in the labor force. Not very good. Not in the labor force goes up by 800,000. But look at this. Unknown. There's no non-responses. Your non-responses, 6 million. So 6 million, 110 is about 5%. So about 5 point something percent. And now look at what goes up by 1 million. So 5%, it's a little over 6%. It's over 6% of people didn't bother to answer. Now the thing is, we got to find out, well, who are those people, and how do we deal with that problem? Now, the answer that I'm going to give you, at least to how I dealt with it, I'm not really sure whether I may not have dealt with it the best way. I had to finish this so I could present this to you today. And these are the kind of things, sometimes you have deadlines, and this is what you have to do. But I'll show you how I dealt with this and what the problem is. The first thing we can see, let's look at the DID. These are the densely inhabited districts. Okay, the densely inhabited districts, this is the total. We see the total goes up about 1 million. Total goes up, so the labor force in the densely inhabited districts increases. The population is shrinking, but the densely inhabited districts, the major cities and the core areas, goes up 1 million in the 5 years. So that's an expansion of the labor force. Labor force itself, though, falls by 1 million, according to this data. Not in the labor force, rises about 800,000. But let's look and see almost 1.1 million increase in unknown. And we can see it's more than 8%. It's more than 8%. And now when we look at the non-DID, look at this unknown. That's 2%. So the non-responses in the DID in the urban areas is 4 times higher. Non-responses is 4 times higher, so there's a real bias in the urban areas. Now we're talking about where we're trying to understand what's going on in the labor market. We've got an extra 1 million people. And in fact, look at this. 2010 to 2015, the unknown actually falls. The number of unknowns actually declines in the non-DID, as does the total. Oh, I'm sorry, that number's wrong. That should be 20, it might be 20 million. 250. I'll have to check that. That needs to be. That might be 20 million. 255. Let's see. I think that no. Oh, it might be. Yeah. It's 20. I think it's 20 million. That looks like that adds up. Yeah, that adds up. I think that adds up. But you see, this number declines. So there's fewer where this number jumps. This number really increases. So I need to send this to you because I finished it this morning. So here's what I did. I said, well, now let's look at it by age. Let's look at this by age. And let's look at, here's the DID, no response, 2015 and 2010. So here's by age, from 15 to 100. So we see the non-response percentage jumps. 18, 20, it's about, in 2015, look at it jumped from like 4% to 12%. 12% non-response. That's a level of non-response that you, as an analyst, you start getting really worried. I mean, it's 1 or 2%, 2 or 3%, but 15% non-response. Now you really, and it's 15% non-response, and it's clustered. This high non-response is clustered at this age. And notice how that's rise. Now, what's really interesting is that these cross. So elderly people actually had better response rate between 2010 and 2015, much better response rate. Younger people had a much worse response rate. And that's in the DID. Where we look at the non-DID, we can see that it crosses in the same way, but these values are fairly low anyway. So we're talking about typically 2%, no more than 4%, but typically in the range of 2 to 3%. Well, this is a problem. And this is one of those things when you do data analysis, this is what you need to really understand what's going on in your data. I knew I had this problem before, but when I only had 1 year, I didn't realize that, and when it was 2010, I did have this, I kind of dealt with it. I said, well, okay. But now when I looked at 2015, then we have a problem. This is a real problem when you're trying to compare. If you're going to compare the data from the 2 years, you've got that cross, the non-responses, they cross, you've got 2 different samples. So you've got so much missing data that you have 2 different samples. One of the things that we want to say, we have a saying, we want to have apples to apples, which means we want to compare the same thing. We want to compare the same thing. And we call it apples to apples comparison. Has anybody, do you know this is Red Delicious, right? Do you know what Red Delicious is? It's an American apple. It's American. It's like a lot of things in America. It looks really good and it tastes awful. It's actually an awful apple, but it looks good. But at any rate, that is, if we make apples to apples comparison, we want to make that comparison. And the problem is when I looked at that data, I can't. It's not apples to apples. It's this. It's I call apples to orangutan. It's got a nice smile though. He's got nice teeth. But it's, in other words, you really, if you're trying to make a comparison, you've got 2 different, the data sets are so different that it's really hard to say what the change is. It's really hard to say, and in fact, the outcome the outcome depends upon how you treat the unknown, especially in the DID. In the dense inhabited districts, the percentage of non-responses is so high, and it's clustered at certain age groups that are so high that it really has an effect on your outcome, and in making the comparison between the 2 years. So that's what I've done is I've done that. I've looked at that and said, well, right now I'm comparing apples and orangutans, not apples to apples. So I've got to go back. I had to go back, and what I did, the way I dealt with it, was I evenly distributed. I just assumed that based on the percentage of responses, and I distributed that over all the responses. Okay, that's a reasonable first assumption, but it might be that a more sophisticated analysis would be able to do something better. In other words, to be able to identify that in that age group, it's more likely to be, and it's done by age. In other words, the age group, it's affected by, in other words, if it's 20-year-olds that have this characteristic, then it's evenly distributed across the 20-year-olds. So it takes into account the characteristic of the age. So it's probably reasonable, but I'm not really sure whether that's the best way. I'm not 100% sure. But there's nothing wrong with having those kind of doubts, but I just want to tell you that so that you know that's what's in this analysis, and that's what's underlying. And that's, when you do data analysis, that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to tell people, okay, this is what's going on, these are the assumptions that I had to make. This is, you have to be transparent about that. These are the assumptions that I made, so this is, with that understanding, these are my results. So with that understanding, these are the results as I distributed that, and I got these outcomes. So you can see for 2010, 5,891,000 entering And then the exit transition, 9.22 million. Almost the same number entering in 2015. And a little bit higher exit. So, and in fact, so what we're seeing, but there's much more lower entry in non-DID. So lower entry in non-DID and an increase in exit. And and we'll see, this is actually very important. There's important implications, and especially if you're analyzing domestic, if you're looking at domestic companies, small companies that operate in the countryside, this